Hello and welcome to Cruising and Musing. I am your host, Rob, and this is going to be our video on the myth of the Christian nation. Essentially, why does religion play such a role in American politics? And this was a question given to me by a co-worker who moved in from the Caribbean and just really didn't understand the huge role the religion was playing in the Roe v. Wade stuff about a month ago, a few weeks ago even. And he asked me this question, what's the deal with all the religion? And I did my best to answer his question, and I'm going to provide the same answer here that I gave to him. And this starts off with the fact that our very, fundamental founded population here in what later became the United States, when we call ourselves culturally back, were the English. Except they weren't just any English. They were the Puritans. We might know them or remember them as the Pilgrims, the ones on the Mayflower and those who came thereafter. Well, the thing that we don't normally talk about too deeply in school, because we don't want to offend anyone who's religious and get fired over it, is that the Puritans or Pilgrims were more than just people fleeing religious persecution. In fact, they're not really being religiously persecuted all that much at all, but we like to say that to make it sound like we're not victim blaming them. Basically, the Puritans that come over are the people who give us the word puritanical Protestants. They are absolutely no fun whatsoever. Don't drink. Everything is about living a righteous life and, being devout, and, wealth is a sin, pleasure is a sin, having good food's a sin. Basically, they're a bunch of unlikable cunts, and even the English are like, hey, GTFO, man, you are way too stuck up even for us. And when the English say that you need to unwind and learn to enjoy life a bit, you've gone off the deep end on it. So this is the founding group we're working with. And I'm talking about them and not the Spanish because, by the time the Spanish hit in the early 1500s, by the time the Puritans hit, the Spanish have already gone through the area, spread the plagues around. The Native American population has been decimated by the diseases and everything, and the Spanish are occupied down where they know there's gold. So think southwestern North America, Central America, South America. They're basically giving up the rest of this land as not that desirable to the English and the French to just fight about. And we're not going to be talking about the French because the French never really sent colonists in mass to the area, aside from like Haiti and New Orleans, Quebec. The rest of the big holdings France had were never really populated that heavily by French settlers. They just didn't have control of them very long, and France is a much larger, much more fertile place than England, so they didn't really have as much reason to leave. So the English continue to spread and populate outward in the North Americas to fulfill the 13 colonies. I'm assuming you're familiar with your basic American history of what's going on at that point in time. So as you have the spread of the English colonies in this area, the preachers and everything that are already here are training new preachers under them, and they're sending them out to man new churches as the rural population grows. And this is one of the big things to remember, is that your fundamental puritanical Protestantism always has a much bigger place in the rural schema of things during this whole explanation. So you constantly have an echo chamber of isolated rural communities where they're constantly becoming or maintaining how religious they are, because the only social interaction all these farming families are really getting is when they go into the local hamlet on Sunday for their church time, and again, they're getting the reinforcement of religion, and they're not going to immediately have a sermon, then act disreligious in front of their neighbors. So while there might be a church, you're not exactly going to see much in the way of bars, saloons, taverns, the sort of debauchery we think of when we think of like the Old West places where, you know, every town has at least a saloon. That was not present at this time. These frontier towns are mostly built around a church with a couple of, you know, village peoples in that might have certain skills that the farmers are bringing stuff in for them to work with. You know, so you might have the guy who makes the best carpets and whatnot, or the best cloth, and you're bringing in, you know, your fleece and wool and whatnot to that. And this is how life goes on for, you know, like around the next 100 years or so. We go through the Salem witch trials. That's how, like, echo chambery and puritanical things get to the point of being, is that, you know, we have our own version of the Inquisition, and we call it the Salem witch trials, and we're now, you know, killing people for being witches the way the Inquisition was. So this is not a bright, shining moment for the colonies or our cultural heritage. In fact, we have lots of these blemishes, and we'll talk about more of them in other videos. So what comes next here? Well, what comes next is kind of the rise of the first small cities in the area. You know, you have New Amsterdam that had been there. It grows, it becomes New York as the Dutch give up claim on the area to the English. You have further growth of cities. You know, Philadelphia begins to be planned and grown. Pittsburgh, Savannah, other areas. And of course, as these cities grow, they begin to support a populace that has time to do things and has the wealth to do things other than just work and pray. Now, that's an important point about them having time to do things other than work and pray. Because what do you do if you have time to do stuff other than work and pray? You're going to go and have fun. And there's nothing a Puritan hates worse than fun. So when I refer to fun in the cities, just keep in mind I'm referring to the kind of fun that you would have with a pile of cocaine and a couple of prostitutes, not the kind of fun like, you know, we're having a ball game and something wholesome. So you have, you know, the emergence of cities and fun and leisure activities coming up into the colonies for the first times with the rise of these cities. And now the Puritans know that having fun is a lot more fun than, you know, simply living a life of turmoil, self-hatred, self-loathing, and penance. So they have to start acting out against this fun, and they begin to preach out against it. And we have the rise of what is called the First Great Awakening, which is really them speaking a response to this rise of the cities and the coming of fun to the colonies as they were. So this, you know, First Great Awakening, it stresses, you know, being religious, you know, being purified again, recapturing your faith, becoming holy once more, shedding off, you know, these new things and what have you. And it starts to gather a bunch of people together with tent revivals and whatnot. And I want you to remember that point of it's gathering people together, a lot of them in one place. Because if you want to get a message out to a lot of people, you got to go to the places where they congregate. That becomes a relevant point here in a little while. Alright, so the First Great Revival comes and pushes back against what's going on in the cities and kind of calms the jets of what's going on in the cities for a while, and they begin to get into other things for pursuits and enjoyments. And this brings about our enlightenment, because when we're not going to run around boozing and chasing women, we're going to get together and start thinking, and you know, we're going to booze and argue politics with each other, since we can't chase the girls anymore because it got the religious people angry at us. And that really brings about the Enlightenment and the study of these Enlightenment ideas and Enlightenment writers at this point in time. And, we go through the French and Indian War, our Revolutionary War, with the people that, came of age during this era, where they were kids through the first Great Enlightenment. Then when they were young men, they hit the First Great Awakening. Then they were young men in the Enlightenment, and they're embracing these ideas, and they built a government and a nation out of these ideas. And, things keep moving forward from there. So by the time that George Washington finishes his second term, and even as early as the start of the American Revolution, people are ready for some fun again. In fact, Benjamin Franklin has so much fun that it becomes a matter of great note in many areas, especially France, where he is chasing every older widow he can find, and even married women at times, trying to play hide the salami, because Ben Franklin knows a good time when he sees it. And them French ladies apparently were a good time for him. So, start with the American Revolution and going forward up to the year 1800, you kind of have this again reemergence of fun in the cities. And, we can't have that. So we start to get the Second Great Revival, or Second Awakening, if you will, occurring during this time of about 1800 moving forward until about 1840. It's a couple generations worth of people that are going through this Second Great Awakening. And this is where we really go, sink the hook in of tying together American politics and American religion, because now you have all these great big gatherings of people being religious and hyping the religious and getting more religious and, acting more religious. And, you got that snowball thing of, you have gone specifically to this religious activity, and you're not going to be the one that gets out religion by everyone else, so you're going to be even more devout and even more faithful, and you have this snowball effect in these activities. But what you also have for the first time now is a representative government for these people. So you have politicians looking at all these people gathered up together that are all being really super religious, and they want to be there to talk to these people and sell themselves to these people, because why would you waste days, riding a horse or, driving a dog cart, your butt taken out of the shape of a saddle or a bench, very uncomfortable travel in the heat and everything, when you can just go to one of these huge religious conventions and talk to a few thousand people and get your message out way more effectively. Because remember, there's no radio, there's no TV, there's only the print and press and handbills. But, any man who owns land, which a lot of these farmers are owning land, can vote. Alright, so you can go out to where all of your landowners have conveniently gathered, and you can start preaching at them to get them to vote for you. But they're here for being religious, so you're going to lean into that, and you're going to try to capture that religious fervor and tie that to fervor for your politics and your name. And this is where we really get to get that marriage to go on. And coming out of the Great Awakening, we, continue to have this kind of melding between politics and religion as fervor, because as we come out of the Great Awakening, we begin to have the arrival of the Irish in mass who are Catholic, and now we can rally that religious fervor. We don't need another Great Awakening now to, save the dying off of religion in the country, because we have, the Catholic invaders to push back against, the Irish Catholic other. And this, again begins the practice of othering each immigrant group as they come in, as, they are making changes that the current population just don't want. Whether or not those changes are actually true. But they are displacing things that are already there in presence. And we're just kind of touring through the industrial side of Fort Myers, by the way. So we have this whole thing going on where, the Second Great Awakening fades out, but you don't need a Third Great Awakening because now you have the Irish Catholics coming in, and well, now we can rally against the Irish Catholics. And, the words Irish need not apply go up in store windows and whatnot because they're being so highly discriminated against. At the same time, we also have another great moral evil to fight against called slavery going on. So you really have this whole rise with particularly the Republican Party of being hyper religious going into the Civil War with these, puritanical Protestant ideas that are now coming heavily into the American cities, and pushing back against the debauchery, the rise of the temperance movement, the rise of the abolitionist movement, and you are using that religious fervor and those religious beliefs that these things are wrong to really whip up support in your base, and you're working it. You're working it for all you're worth, and you're tying that religious fervor, those endorphins, all those endorphins being released and worked up, you're tying that back to you and your political campaign. So we come through the Civil War, and now we have the Reconstruction period, and we have more of this divisive politics. And as we come through the Reconstruction, we get into the 1890s, and we've now, we're coast to coast. We have the Transcontinental Railroad. Stuff gets much easier for people to get around. We can now do, big political gatherings at the train tracks in these stations, and the president can give speeches off the back of it and everything else. So, this is all progress, but you still need large gatherings of people to speak to. So the importance of the churches as places of doing large gatherings, begin to speak to them, stay and remain. And as long as you are using the religious gatherings to continue to push your political messages, you're going to be blending those together. All right? And this kind of stays with us into the 1890s, early 1900s, and we have the arrival of the Italian immigrants, while the nation states of Italy are gathering together to form Italy, because it was all broken up before this point. And that's what's really driving, the German and then the Italian arrivals, is the unification of Germany and then the unification of Italy is driving the arrivals of those immigrant groups over. So in the 1890s going into the 1900s, you have large arrivals of Italian immigrants into the Americas, into the United States, rather. And now you have a new group of of Catholics to other and rail against. And, this is also part of the rise of anti-Semitism, because you're also getting a large number of Jewish arrivals from Eastern Europe during this time period as well. Not 1890, but more like post-World War I, with the fall of the Bolshevik Revolution and whatnot, and the emergence of the USSR, and that as an atheist communistic state was really driving out a lot of the Eastern European Jewish people, and they came over at the time as well. So you kind of have the rise of anti-Semitism at this time, not only in the classic sense, but now against these Eastern European Jews as well, who are so different and unusual compared to the Jews that were around priorly, because it's a different cultural base despite having a similar religion base. And that's going on during this time. So all during this time, you don't need another Great Awakening, because you have all these groups of the mountain pot mixing together that you can keep rallying your white Anglo-Saxon Protestants against. Well, we go into, the Prohibition era as a rally against this, and we go into the Depression, and, there's this push of, you can't afford to feed your family, what are you going to do, having a good time. So there's this big return of to austerity through the Prohibition and the Depression, because when times are hard, you're just not going to be good time Charlie. Then we go into World War II, and for the first time ever, we are fighting a real physical evil And our people who come back from this, our servicemen who go over and come back are completely messed up by the experience. We had a family friend who was a sniper in World War II, and he was there for the liberation of 3 of the concentration camps. And the things he saw in those concentration camps woke him up 50, 60 years later, screaming in his sleep out of the horrors of what he saw, well into his 80s. I mean, I've never heard a grown man scream that way. And it was all about the things that he had seen while he was there to, fight that war with the camps. It wasn't the people he killed, it was the things he had seen in the camps. So we have that going on. So everyone's coming back from the war, and they're going to the church to deal with these demons that they're carrying on their backs and in their memories from having been in the war. And where that goes from there is, into the McCarthyism era at the same time. So you have all these servicemen who are now, going to church on the regular to deal with their demons. The rise of McCarthyism, and we really begin to solidify, the idea that we need to make Russia now, Soviet Russia, the other that we're dealing with. And, we begin to other Russia and the communism and everything else, and we begin to draw these lines because, nothing gets the troops out that motivates them to vote for you. Like if you can convince them that you're the guy who's fighting against the other, that is the danger to them and their families. And this is where we really start to see the dividing line of, communist versus not communist isn't just a political thing. It's a big, national motivation thing. They're the enemy. And the big messaging starts on that here during this era in the, late 40s, 50s, going through the early 60s, though McCarthy was a small portion in that time. So they're, flogging this othering of Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, and they're using the religion, they're tapping into it, because, here you have Stalinism, the atheist state, the replacement of the Russian Orthodox Church with the worship of the state, and it gives them another way in which the communists are the enemy, because they're not only trying to take away, your ability to become rich and free and live free and, spend your money how you want and everything else, but now they're threatening to take your God away too, and then religion, and it just, it helps wind it up further and further and further in a way that is none too good. When you want, less hostility towards outgroups. This is also the point in time where you kind of see the disappearance of the hyphen Americans coming out of the European heritages. You no longer hear people talking about being Italian, German, Polish, whatever, American. They're now white. And part of that is because, you don't want to have your Protestants and your Catholics, your Polish and your Germans fighting with each other and squabbling with each other. You want that larger group so you can harness that together as a bigger voting block and a bigger political block of, okay, well, now you're not all these different European Americans, you're just white America. And you kind of have that blended in generalization and unification of culture coming out of the 50s. The rise of McDonald's and consumerism and all of that, and that people who grew up in that era now look back on fondly as that's the way things used to be, and don't realize that it was all a constructed thing. And now we come forward, having gone through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, with having the Soviets to rail against, and here we are, where we're still have politicians that have been in power for all that time, flogging the same dog, trying to beat this dead horse of, Russia and everything, and trying to use the other as the enemy to continue beating this dead horse. And that brings us, again to today, of where they're still using the same old tricks, which is why they're still reaching back to the religion and trying to tap into that. And because we've had this constant sustain of religion as part of the political rhetoric and everything. It's helped keep religion alive and well in the United States. Where the demonization of the non-religious enemy and everything has turned it into, to be a good person you must be religious, so on and so forth. And that's why the religion still has such a big role in politics here in the States. That is the myth of the Christian nation, a history of it, as I understand it. Let me know down in the comments what you think.